Welcome, dear listeners, to another journey into the heart of learning, a journey where words are not just tools but companions, where sentences are not just structures but bridges between minds, and where each new discovery in language feels less like homework and more like opening a door into a new world. And today we begin by reflecting on something very simple yet very powerful, the idea that every learner, no matter where they start, carries within themselves the ability to grow, to change, and to expand their capacity for expression. Because language is not reserved for the gifted or the privileged, it belongs to anyone willing to give time, patience, and curiosity.
And I would add, Emma, that this is the most important reminder we can give to our audience at the start, because so many people approach language learning with fear or hesitation, convinced that they are too old, too busy, or simply not talented enough. But if we slow down and really think about it, language is something we have all mastered once already, in our childhood, before we could even read or write. And we did it not by memorizing grammar charts or drilling lists, but by listening, experimenting, making mistakes, and being surrounded by words. So the very fact that every one of us speaks at least one language fluently is proof that the human brain is designed for this, and that we carry the blueprint of success within us already.
Yes, and I think beginning with that reminder is crucial, because it shifts the focus away from anxiety and failure and toward possibility and growth. And when we talk about learning vocabulary, which is the main theme of our discussion today, we are not talking about collecting stamps or memorizing meaningless data, but about equipping ourselves with the tools to describe our experiences, to share our emotions, to persuade, to inspire, and even to dream in greater detail. And so, in these minutes together, we are not merely discussing words on a page, we are talking about expanding the very horizons of thought and feeling.
And what excites me most about vocabulary is the way it slowly but surely transforms the way you see the world, because if you only know the word blue, then the sky, the ocean, and the paint on the wall all collapse into one simple category. But when you learn navy, azure, turquoise, cobalt, and indigo, suddenly your perception sharpens, and you begin to notice differences, subtleties, and shades that were invisible before, which shows us that words are not just labels for things we already see. They are lenses that allow us to see more, to think more, and even to feel more deeply.
That's so beautifully put, Daniel, and it brings me back to the reason why I love teaching and talking about vocabulary so much, because it is not simply about passing a test or writing a better essay, it is about giving people the gift of precision and freedom, the power to say exactly what they mean rather than struggling with vague phrases, the freedom to capture subtle emotions, the ability to paint with words instead of sketching with rough outlines, and when you start to experience that precision, you realize that vocabulary is not a burden but a form of empowerment.
And maybe that's the perfect way to frame today's conversation, because in the next part of this podcast we will go deeper into methods and techniques, how to read, how to listen, how to practice. But before we dive into the practical steps, we need to set the stage with this conviction. Vocabulary growth is not about memorization for its own sake, it is about expanding your mind, your perspective, your ability to connect, and your ability to find joy in communication. And once you see it that way, the whole process becomes lighter, more exciting, and even enjoyable, because every new word is not just another item on a list, it is another color on your palette, another instrument in your orchestra, another star in your sky.
So, as we take the first steps in today's episode, I want our listeners to carry with them this sense of possibility, this quiet confidence that no matter their age, their background, or their struggles in the past, they can and they will expand their vocabulary, because language is a living thing, and the moment you engage with it patiently and consistently, it responds, it grows with you, it shapes you as much as you shape it, and in that beautiful partnership between learner and language lies the true joy of communication.
And as we move forward, I invite our listeners to imagine that every new word they learn is like planting a seed, and though the seed may seem small at first, with attention, patience, and care it will grow into a tree that not only enriches their own garden of language but also offers shade, fruit, and beauty to everyone they communicate with.
And today Daniel and I are going to spend some time talking about vocabulary, because in my experience it is one of the most important and at the same time one of the most misunderstood parts of learning a language, since so many people think they can just memorize long lists of words the night before an exam and magically become fluent. When in reality vocabulary is about growing a living bank of words that you actually understand and can use naturally, comfortably, and confidently in everyday communication.
That's so true, Emma, and I think it's something learners need to hear again and again, because grammar often feels like the most important part of English when you're in school, since that's what teachers usually test and correct. But when you step into the real world, you realize very quickly that vocabulary is the real toolkit of language, the material that allows you to shape ideas and express feelings. And while grammar gives you a framework like the skeleton of the body, it is vocabulary that provides the flesh and the color and the movement, and without it your communication becomes very limited, almost like trying to paint a picture with only two colors when a whole rainbow is available. That's so true, Emma, and I think it's something learners need to hear again and again, because grammar often feels like the most important part of English when you're in school, since that's what teachers usually test and correct. But when you step into the real world, you realize very quickly that vocabulary is the real toolkit of language, the material that allows you to shape ideas and express feelings. And while grammar gives you a framework like the skeleton of the body, it is vocabulary that provides the flesh and the color and the movement, and without it your communication becomes very limited, almost like trying to paint a picture with only two colors when a whole rainbow is available.
Exactly, and one of the best ways to expand that rainbow of words is by reading. And I don't just mean textbooks, but also novels, articles, blogs, children's stories, and even comic books. Because when you read extensively, you don't just meet words in isolation, you see them in action, surrounded by sentences that show you how they are used, what other words they like to appear with, whether they sound formal or casual, and what kind of feeling they carry. And that context is powerful because our brains are designed to remember stories, images, and connections much better than lists of disconnected items.
Yes, Emma, and one of my favorite examples is when someone reads a detective novel and encounters the word alibi repeatedly in conversations between characters, and without even opening a dictionary they quickly understand that it means an explanation of where someone was during a crime, and because the word is tied to suspense, to drama, to images of detectives and suspects, it sticks in memory much more firmly than if it had simply been copied from a vocabulary list, and this shows that emotional engagement is key to remembering new words.
And once you see a word like that in a book, you start noticing it everywhere. Suddenly you hear it in a movie or in a podcast, and that recognition gives you a little spark of excitement, a feeling of success, which strengthens the memory and encourages you to keep reading more. So in a way, each new word becomes a small victory.
And to make sure those victories don't slip away, I always recommend keeping a vocabulary journal, because writing down the word, its meaning, the sentence where you found it, and a new sentence you create yourself transforms it from a passing stranger into a familiar friend, and by revisiting that notebook regularly you remind your brain that these words are valuable and worth keeping.
And vocabulary journals become even more powerful when you add word families, because if you learn create, you can also write creation, creative, creativity, creator, and maybe even expressions like create out of thin air. So from one word you suddenly unlock a whole family. And the next time you meet any of those related words, your brain recognizes the connection instantly, which multiplies your vocabulary with very little extra effort.
Exactly, and it mirrors the way native speakers think, because we don't see words as isolated islands, we see them as networks connected by roots, suffixes, and meanings, and the more you explore those networks, the stronger and more flexible your vocabulary becomes.
And speaking of networks, I love thematic learning, because instead of collecting random words, you choose a topic like travel, the food, or technology, and you learn the set of vocabulary connected to that theme. So if you're studying travel, you might focus on boarding pass, departure gate, security check, customs officer, and carry-on luggage, and then when you actually go to an airport, all those words come into your mind together like a ready-made package, making communication so much easier.
That's such an efficient way to learn, Emma, and it prepares you for real-life situations, because in conversation we rarely need a single word on its own, we need sets of words that belong to a situation, and by practicing them together you're training your brain for practical use.
And of course flashcards can also play a role, especially when combined with spaced repetition, because instead of reviewing everything randomly, the system reminds you of words just before you're about to forget them, which means you spend your time reviewing what you actually need, and the more times you successfully recall a word at the right interval, the more deeply it gets carved into your memory.
Yes, that's the beauty of spaced repetition, Emma. It works with the science of memory instead of against it, because psychologists have shown that if we review too soon we waste effort, but if we review too late, we've already forgotten. So the trick is to catch the word right before it disappears from memory, and each successful recall strengthens the neural pathway until the word feels natural and automatic.
And if learners combine that with listening practice, the effect is even stronger, because listening exposes you to natural pronunciation, rhythm, and collocations, and you start to notice that people say make a decision instead of do a decision, or strong T instead of powerful T, and those patterns are what make you sound authentic when you speak.
That's so important, and shadowing, repeating aloud after what you hear, is an excellent way to practice, because it trains your mouth and tongue to reproduce the rhythm, and when you finally use the word in your own sentence, it flows much more easily.
And of course, speaking is essential, because you can read, write, and listen all day, but until you actually say the word out loud, your brain hasn't fully claimed it as part of your active vocabulary. So whether you're practicing with a friend, joining a language club, or even talking to yourself while cooking, you're signaling to your mind, this word is useful, I need it, and that signal is what makes it stick.
And learners should never fear mistakes, because mistakes are not failures, they are teachers, and when you use a word incorrectly and someone corrects you, that moment becomes a strong memory that ensures you get it right next time, which is much more effective than never using the word at all.
Yes, and another beautiful trick is to connect new words to personal experiences or images, because our brains love stories and pictures. So if you learn nostalgia, instead of just writing longing for the past, you can tie it to the warm feeling you had last summer when you looked through childhood photos, and suddenly the word becomes alive and unforgettable.
That's a wonderful example, Emma, and to extend that idea, learners can even invent short stories using their new words, because when you weave words into a narrative, even a funny or silly one, your brain remembers them as part of a sequence, and that makes recall much easier than if they were sitting alone on a list.
And let's not forget technology, because nowadays apps, websites, and even social media accounts can deliver a new word to you every day, and if you collect those small daily doses consistently, by the end of the year you'll have hundreds of new friends in your vocabulary bank.
And that consistency is the golden rule, because vocabulary doesn't grow overnight but over months of steady exposure, practice, and review, and if you dedicate just 15 to 20 minutes a day reading, journaling, listening, or speaking, you will be amazed at the difference after 6 months or a year.
And most importantly, enjoy the process, because vocabulary is not only about exams or tests, it's about opening new doors of expression, about having more colors to paint your thoughts and more keys to unlock conversations. And when you approach learning with curiosity and joy, the words will come more naturally and stay with you longer.
Well said, Emma, and as we bring today's conversation to a close, I would remind our listeners that vocabulary improvement is not about one single method but about weaving together reading, writing, listening, speaking, reviewing, and connecting personally with the words, and over time this combination builds not only a bigger vocabulary but also a richer, more confident relationship with the language.
Absolutely, Daniel. So wherever you are, keep learning, keep practicing, and remember that every new word is a step forward in your language journey. Thank you so much for joining us today on English is Easy.
Until next time, everyone, keep exploring and keep expanding your vocabulary.